10 shares, they won't have 10%, if that makes sense. So if you start at the percentage rather than the actual number of shares, then you have to do that calculation. We'll get onto that, and that's, I suppose now I'm just making you aware of that, so when the time comes, you know it's coming, you can research it a bit more. So usually you'll have a number of shares which is divisible by 10. So if you have 1 share, 10 shares, 100 shares, 1,000 shares, each of those shares, when you create a company, has what's called a nominal value, so like a basic value that you give it. So it might be 100 shares at one time. What you can do to make your shares more liquid is do something called you subdivide them. So it's a pretty simple process. You can subdivide 100 shares into 10,000 shares, and the total value will be the same, but each share value will be smaller. So rather than 100 shares of £1, you'll have 10,000 shares of 1p each, if that makes sense. The total is the same, the total value is the same, but the number of shares are bigger. And you do that by, you send a form called an SHO2 form to Companies House. That's worth noting down. It's pretty simple. I would do one of them in about, it takes 5 minutes and you send it in the post. But it's that's one of those things that if you didn't know about it, you'd end up paying loads of money for it. It's actually super simple. So it's called an SHO2. It's something that you download. That's the kind of thing that will be available on this platform. You'll just be able to download it kind of as and when the time comes. Okay, so the next part is your investor benefits. That they're investing in your company, they want to know what they're getting back. So do people know about EIS and SEIS in this room? Does anyone not know? That's a difficult question, I know, but you know. So it's basically, if you're a new starter and you're not operating in like a kind of an excluded field from this, it's a tax relief. So your investor will receive a tax relief on their investment if your company qualifies. And what that means is that the investor is much more likely to invest because there's more in it for them. The tax relief for SEIS, each company, if you qualify, which most of you almost certainly will, it means that you have an £150,000 allowance for your company, within which, if an investor invests and they qualify for it, basically 50% of their investment is money that they would have had to spend on their income tax bill. So it's like it's basically, in some respects, 50% of your investment is just coming from HMRC, because they wouldn't have had access to that money otherwise. So it's brilliant. Like it's strangely good. It makes getting investment easier, and it's definitely something that if you can, you should do it. You should apply for something that's called Advanced Assurance online if you haven't already. You basically submit a bunch of documents and then they tell you if you qualify. Yeah.
So if you've got a foreign investor,
they won't qualify.
Right.
It's just it's a UK tax relief for UK investors.
And this advanced assurance is really for us to get assurance from the HMRC that they will state that we're qualified.
Yeah.
Right.
So the advanced assurance, usually when you do an application, it applies to a specific investment. So if you were saying I'm getting £100,000 investment, you'd send your advanced assurance application to HMRC relating to that specific £100,000 investment. When they send it you back, you can then, when they accept, you can then say to your investor, look, you're going to get this tax benefit, you should definitely invest in my company, and you can kind of offer them, you can get a better deal out of it because they're getting a better deal out of it, so it's kind of, everyone wins, and well, the winner is basically like entrepreneurship and innovation. That's why it exists, and you get to be the beneficiaries of that.
Sorry, just another question. Can you do this advanced assurance application before a serious investor has come along as well?
Yeah.
As to entice.
Yeah, but you have to put 2 potential investors on your application.
Okay.
But they don't have to invest in your company.
If they're entirely made up.
Yeah, they don't have to invest in your company, but you have to have 2 potential investors on your application.
Yeah. They don't. I mean, I reckon you could probably get away with it. So I've never done the application. I
Yeah, you just-
probably should, but
Yeah.
if you said to investors which weren't actually, it was never invested in the end, it's still like you still gain something from having done that application. I
Yeah,
think,
it
as
doesn't.
well.
You don't have to, because this one guy, he put his brother, and he
Yeah.
He was not an investor in the end.
Exactly.
So they don't really check
Mhm.
for that. It's just
Yeah.
that you have to get this assurance because it looks good to investors to know that you have SCIS
Exactly.
assurance.
Yeah. So SCIS basically is the first 150,000. EIS is like it goes up to a value of something like 3 million. So most investments you'll get from a UK investor will qualify from at least for EIS. SCIS also, your company has to be under 2 years old. So you kind of have to get on with it if you're approaching that landmark. So
And is there a percentage rebate that actually investors get back for
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
I think one is 15.
yeah,
I'm
so
not sure what the percentage is.
SCIS is the 50, EIS is 30.
So what is it? What is the rebate? They don't pay the tax on the 75.
Yeah. So if you're, let's say I'm an investor, the basic, the top level rule is that if you put in £10,000 into a company, then your maximum, and it qualifies for SCIS, then your maximum exposure as the investor is something like 2,700 and something, because 50% comes directly off your next tax bill. So you'll just physically pay less tax. If you're not actually going to pay that tax, if your tax bill isn't that big, it will take the form of a rebate. And then if it all goes wrong, you effectively have, like, the loss that the investor would have made, they get to then offset that off their next tax bill. So you don't need to worry too much about that, but the principle is that it's a pretty good deal for the investor, and it's a good deal. Yeah, it's a good deal for
I think one of the things that
investor.
is good for the investors as well, because if you sell your company, you don't pay capital gains tax.
Yes.
If you have the SCIS,
Yeah,
EIS assurance as well.
Yeah, so there's like there's the benefit down the line as well. Exactly. To be honest, I would definitely look that stuff up I'd look it up on the government website, like gov.uk. That's actually, I've got links to those in the handout. So sorry, for you guys that just arrived, so we're talking about what's in the seed investment term sheet. You got your basic details. A lot of what we've covered is in the handouts already, so you haven't missed too much. So the next thing about this investor benefits, we're talking about share rights. So voting and dividends. So when you hold shares in a company, what we say is that each share carries a vote. So if you have a shareholder who has 70% and one who has 30%, the shareholder with 70% has 70 votes, the one with 30% has 30 votes. So that's the majority. So your investors will have a right to vote. And if you're distributing a profit, usually that would be pro rata or proportionate. Like lawyers often use the word pro rata, but it just means proportionate to the shareholdings that you've got. Does that make sense? Then we've got information rights. So your investor will they won't be involved day to day in the operation of your company, but they'll want to know that things are going like reasonably well, and you want to keep them updated. So they'll usually they'll want to see your business plan to begin with, which is kind of somewhat the basis of their investment. And then they'll want to see, they might want to see quarterly accounts, but I think in your case, for me, I would probably just offer them like annual accounts. And then if they want to ask questions from time to time, they can do. And a board seat, do we know what that's referring to?
Yeah.
So like if they want to be a director in your company, then by all means. I probably
When you say by all means, does that mean, are we obliged to
no
to
exactly
say-
no. I think so contract law. This is a contract. You're entering into a contract with your investor, and contract law 101. The first thing that you learn is that you can more or less make it as and what you want it to be. Everything that we do here is somewhat standardized. So kind of saying, we've found like a balanced position between companies and investors. But if you wanted to, you could give really harsh conditions on the investor. Not having a board seat wouldn't be really harsh. It's not necessarily standard to have that, but it's up to you what you put in there and what you agree with them. So the next part is your operational plans. So now we're starting to think about, you've got the money in the bank, which is great, but like how are you using that money? Like what are people going to be doing from there on? So founder roles. This is very much like up to your discretion. If it was me, I'd probably be keeping that as broad as possible. I'm talking about the roles of the founders in the company moving forwards, salaries of founders, because they, at the moment you might just pay yourself what you want, if anything, but they might have a say in, they might want to say, well, no, if you want to pay yourself a salary, you have to go through me first. That's the kind of thing that you have to grapple with investors. In the term sheet, like, I wouldn't go into those details. That's the kind of thing that if they ask for it, okay, you put it in, but you don't volunteer it straight away. But you do want to be thinking about, like, broadly what roles might be. And in the long form agreement, you might put like a schedule which says, if there's two co-founders, like co-founder 1 will be doing this, co-founder 2 will be doing this, but everyone will pitch in and do their bit. Then we've got management, who are the directors. Typically those are going to be the founders. The investor might want to be a director, but not necessarily, depends who they are. We're getting into like the nitty-gritty of board meetings. So when we refer to a board just means the directors together. So we say, how does the board meet? Like, do you have an in-person meeting once a month or once every 3 months? Like, how many directors have to be there for it to be a valid meeting? Because I think one thing to be aware of is that there's a big distinction between a shareholder, who is a owner of shares in the company, and a director, who is effectively an employee of the company, who is managing the company on a day-to-day basis. So when we talk about running the company, voting rights, we are generally talking about directors' voting rights. So every day, different decisions are made in a company. Those decisions are made by the directors. If there's a big decision, like, are we going to raise this investment? Are we going to borrow £20,000? Or this kind of thing. That's where you say, okay, we need the shareholders' consent. So we'll go to the shareholders, then we have to get their permission to do it, and that's when you go into the investors. So day to day, so you guys as the directors of the company who are doing that, and then you go to shareholders as kind of like the next level of consent, I guess. So that can be a bit confusing sometimes, so just be aware of it. And then we've got share option schemes. So this is when we talk. This is the longest slide, by the way. All the other ones are going to be a bit. And I think this is the most important one, because this is when you see the term sheet, you're going to recognise what's on it because of what's on this slide. So share option scheme. Why do we think that's relevant here? Or do we know what share option schemes are first?
Is that talking about the vesting period? How long it's going to take before you can
take a step back though. What is a share option scheme?
Incentive to employees.
Yeah.
For long-term.
Exactly. So it's, that's at like a very top level. That's a very top level answer. It's an incentive for employees, and then kind of the next step from that, specifically, is saying, I am, as a business, to our employees, which could include founders, we are giving you options to purchase shares in the future. That's what a share option is. It's an option to buy a share in the future. And the reason you give it now rather than in the future is that you set the price now based at the current value. So I can give someone an option to buy a share in my company now, and the value per share is £1 per share. But the value in 3 years is going to be like loads of money, like £1,000 per share. So they get to buy shares in my company in 3 years for £1 rather than £3,000. That's the purpose of the option scheme, and that's how it's done. The reason why we put it in here is because the share option scheme, it requires the issuing of shares, which means that whenever new shares are issued, the current shareholders are what we call diluted, which means that there's more shares in the pot, so your share of that big pot becomes smaller. That's what dilution means. So the reason we put it in here is because your investor is going to get diluted by this share option scheme, and you're getting their consent now to say that you're going to get diluted by that, and we're going to say the maximum pot of our company is going to be, let's say, like 10%. So in future, we're going to issue 10% of the company again, or 10% of shares of the company. That sentence wasn't clear. We're going to issue 10% of the. We're going to issue more shares, which then represent 10% of shares in the company, which means that everyone's going to get diluted. So usually, when you would do that, you'd need consent. So you would need consent to issue more shares. So effectively, we're getting consent of the investor up front to do that. Yeah.
And also there is an option, part of the share option scheme, where you're notifying the current shareholder saying, would you like to keep your percentage, or would you opting out is going to be means you're going to be diluted?
Ask me again. Sorry, I didn't quite understand.
No, so let's say in a company I have 25%. New shares are being issued. As a shareholder, I'm getting as a first option to buy more to keep my 25% within the company.
Yeah. Generally, yes, and this is the exception to that rule. So what you're referring to is like a right of first refusal, or we would call it a preemption right. I'll explain that after. What the reason why we put this in here is because we're saying we need this allocation of 10% to give to our employees to keep them happy and to make the company do well. So we're basically saying here we're issuing this 10%, and whether you like it or not, it's happening. So the right of an investor to say no, I'm not being diluted by that is kind of doesn't exist in relation to the share option scheme. And then so you got the basic details, the benefits, everything they're getting, detail on how it's going to work in future, and then we've got kind of the investor protections, which are saying, okay, we're gonna, we're not going to do anything bad to sabotage your investment or to dilute you too much, or we're gonna promise you that everything that we've said is true, and all that kind of things. I'll just go through this list. So anti-dilution, this is what you just said. So these are called preemption rights. So a preemption right is a confusing name. I think the better name for it is just a right of first refusal. So there's two things that a preemption right or a right of first refusal applies to. One is a transfer of shares, and one is an issue of shares. So transfer of shares is where you are selling a number of shares in the company to someone else, or transferring them to as a gift, but there will still be the same number of shares in the company after you've done that transfer. An issue is where you're issuing new shares that are coming into existence from nothing, and that's what causes dilution. So the reason we have a right of first refusal is saying, if I'm going to issue new shares, I'm going to give a right to the existing shareholders to effectively buy those shares at the rate that they're going for, so that they don't get diluted as much. The same applies for transfers. So if you're a shareholder, you'll usually have the right to buy those shares before the person that's receiving them. So if I want to transfer shares to you and you're already a shareholder, you can kind of cut in first and say, no, I'm going to take those shares first because I'm already a shareholder, and that's my right. This is getting a little heavy, so some of this stuff you might want to kind of just, I'll go through it now, but you might want to just use this as a base of knowledge and just build on it in the future. So tag along, co-sale, drug. This is, I almost don't want to talk about these things because they're a bit, I don't want to, I'll look at it briefly. So these are all rights relating to transfers. So tag along means if it's a minority protection for the investor, which says that if a certain number of shares in the company are being sold, e.g. like 50% or more, I get to tag along in that sale. Because what that means is that, let's say I'm the founder and I hold 90% and my investor holds 10. This is stopping me selling 90% and like having a big exit, and my investor still holds his 10%, which doesn't seem fair. So this is basically allowing the investor to be part of that sale. And co-sale is kind of an alternative to it, saying if I'm going to sell any shares, well, let's say there's 100 shares in the company, I own 90, the investor owns 10. If I'm going to sell 10 shares, like I have to give him the right to participate. So proportionate to what we hold, I get to sell 9 shares and he gets to sell 1 share. So that's co-sale. You kind of, any transfer happens together. These things are basically saying like you and your investor are one and the same. Like your shares, if you're selling them, then you know I'm selling mine too. Like you can't do it without me. And drag along is somewhat the opposite. It's where you can drag along the investor with you in a sale. It's saying if I want to sell my company, and the buyer wants to buy 100%, and my investor is giving me a hard time saying no, like, it's not a good deal. I'm not selling I'm keeping my 10%. I get to say to the investor, you know, too bad, pal. You got to sell it. It's over, and the new buyer can take 100%. Does that make sense? Preference. This is where if everything's gone wrong, the investor gets his money back first. This is not going to be the case in your seed investment, probably. For like a bigger institutional investor, like a VC or much more experienced angel investor, they might ask for a preference on liquidation. Liquidation is where the company is turning into nothing and they get their money back first. Consent rights. So, can anyone guess what consent rights are referring to?
Does each one drop out?
What's that, sorry?
Each one drop out?
It can be. So it's more general than that. So yes, but there's like a bunch more than that. So consent rights are basically saying the investor. You can kind of frame it how you want. You can frame it as investor majority consent rights or unanimous shareholder consent rights. But what this means is there's a list of 5-10 items which say without these people these things can't happen. So it might be like changing your shareholder agreement, selling the company, borrowing more than a certain amount of money, spending more than a certain amount of money. It's kind of a list of specific items that you're saying we need the consent of these specific individuals to do that. So it could be that let's say you have 5 investors, you could frame it as investor majority consent. So you need consent of 3 of those investors in order to pass the relevant thing. Or you could say it's unanimous investor consent, which would be less favourable because then you'd need all 5 investors to approve of those matters to get them done. Okay, so let's get through. So warranties are the promises that you make to the investor. So you're saying things like the company owns all the intellectual property, there's no ongoing disputes, there's nothing terrible within this company that we've hidden that you can't see and you're going to find out later. You're kind of just assuring them that everything is as it seems. And we're also going to say not legally binding. So a term sheet is generally not a legally binding document. You're agreeing the terms to your future investment. The legally binding document is what comes next, which is basically a much more detailed, longer form of your term sheet. Obviously, this looks like a lot, but it kind of is all covered in the long document. Okay, so that was the hardest part. Any questions on that?
So the consent rights,
Yeah.
do they take precedence over the shareholder? So even if you've got majority shareholders, let's say one thing, but you've got a consent.
Yeah.
Another consent.
Yeah, I think that's the consent is like is the top level,
Right.
and I think usually when I'm preparing a document like this, like to date I've done it more like as just manual, more lawyer type services. I'd probably put in a clause after which says if the investor is acting in bad faith, which means they're kind of being dishonest or dishonorable in some way, there's a way around it. So you usually there's like an exception in those situations, but broadly those consent rights are kind of the top level and everything else is below it, if that makes sense. A lot of that is conceptual, but when you're actually looking at the term sheet, I think it will put it in perspective. I'm just gonna pull all of these up because we probably talked about quite a lot of them. So SES and ES we talked about, the tax relief. Dividends is a distribution of profits. Annual accounts, I've put annual accounts there because if you've never actually done business annual accounts, I've have not like I've had an accountant do it for me. It's worth just being aware of what annual accounts means and what's in them, like balance sheets and all that stuff, which a bunch of you probably know much better than me. But it's worth kind of looking into what that means: quarterly accounts, annual accounts, balance sheets, all that stuff. It's good to kind of just look it up on Google, look through them if you haven't seen them properly before. Shareholders v directors board, we talked about that, the difference between shareholders and directors. Preemption rights we talked about, so that's the right of first refusal, and that's, you know, you've got your preemption rights on issue but also on transfer, which is it's a benefit for existing shareholders. We've got the tag along or co-sale and drag along. Those are the things that we talked about at the end. Preference is the liquidation right, so if everything's going wrong, the person with the preference is preferred, i.e. they get their money first, if there is any money at that point, which probably not. A nominal value we said earlier is the one when you're asked to register your company, you give it this kind of almost like fictional value of £1 per share. That value that you give when you register is called the nominal value. Nominal values. Some of these things are just like it's good to know what they mean. Basically,
Is there a specific number that the nominal value of all shares needs to add up to on a UK law?
I think generally at least £1.
Okay.
So you could have 100 shares of 1p, and then they add up to £1.
And is that actually money that has to be transferred? Does that actually need to be a transaction of some kind that means they can?
Generally not. It's kind of one of those, like, if you imagine, that's one of those things that like has existed probably for like hundreds of years. So it's one of those things that like, in the past it might have been that it's something that like, it appears on your balance sheet as your share. I'm trying to think of the word. Does anyone know what that appears as on the balance sheet? Your like share capital. I think it's just share capital.
When you set up a company, you can literally say you have one share worth £1.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's no actual transaction.
Yeah. Exactly. And
But when you actually transfer shares, then you need like a form to say transfer shares.
Transfer
Yeah.
shares.
you do yeah. Go ahead.
Is there like a recommendation versus like what you shouldn't do? Like if you have 100 shares, that it makes it difficult for this
Yeah.
later, or 1,000
So
shares makes it
when I register a company, first rule number one is I would always register your own company. You don't need anyone's help to do that, to be totally honest. I would generally do 10,000 shares of 1p each, which they're quite liquid at that point. 10,000, I think that, so then that equals a total value of £100, and at that point I would probably just put £100 into your business bank account and say that's kind of that's the share capital, and you won't go below that number. But usually, like, those amounts are a bit kind of, they're just in answer to your question, they're somewhat for show. If you transfer shares to someone for £6, you could ask for the £6, but you could also not, and nothing bad will come of it. Okay, so any more questions on all that stuff? Should we keep moving? Let's keep going.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
when we have an investment, let's say for 10% of the company,
Mm-hmm.
and then we kind of raise more money, I know we kind of probably issue more shares, but is the investment, so the dilution of the investor is also possible, or
Of the second investment?
Yeah.
Yes.
or do we need to do an agreement before, or is it default that his investment also gets diluted? Shareholding.
Correct. So the default position is that everyone will be diluted equally, unless they insist on something in the first agreement term sheet, that they won't be diluted, so that they would be scaled up. Unless they insist upon that, which generally they won't, then the default position is everyone's diluted the same, founders, investors. Depends on who. Some investors will insist upon it, but at this stage, certainly not. I wouldn't recommend it. And I'd probably say no. I wouldn't be worried about saying no either on that. So I actually wanted to bring them all up on separate rows, but I couldn't do it. So it was all, it's all just one big table. So these are a few things that just came to mind based on having dealt with like a number of seed investment rounds that I feel like people get wrong. So number one is issue new shares, don't transfer existing ones. A big reason for that is, so this is the thing we were talking about before. So you issue new shares rather than transfer existing ones. If you do a share transfer of over £1,000, then there's stamp duty to pay on that. So generally, if you issue new shares, there isn't an upfront tax to pay on that. This is the thing we were talking about before, about the 10%, the 10 shares, not 10 out of 110 isn't 10%. Is probably the motto you want to be going by for that calculation. I've said here 10 divided by 9. So yeah, this is an example that you can do. It's not complicated. So 10 divided by 90 times 100 is the number of shares you should issue. And you can apply that to kind of various different numbers depending on what number of shares that you're giving out. You can't issue fractions of shares. Here's that question you asked earlier. To make your shares more liquid, if you only have one share to begin with, you have to do this subdivision, which is very straightforward. You just divide the fraction the same value. It's a very simple form. You send it to Companies House. They'll record it on your Companies House page. Does everyone know what Companies House is? Yeah. So it's the registry of all companies in the UK. Okay, so these two are a little bit more fluffy, but I think it's just something that I've noticed. Investors, when you get an investor, like they want their money back. They want to have a fixed timeline on things. They want to know what you're doing. I think you want to be upfront with them. Don't say to your investors, "Yeah, we really want to push for an exit. We want within 3 years, and we want to." If that's not your plan, because inevitably it will end up going kind of. You have a negative relationship with your investors, which can be quite detrimental. So if you think about all those, if you think about the investor rights, like the information rights, the consent rights, if they kind of are giving you trouble, it's going to make life a bit more difficult. You're all here because you want to start your own business. You have started your own business. You derive some enjoyment from that rather than having a traditional job. Like if you've got an investor on your back, it starts to feel like you work for someone else, which is something that I think you can avoid by being clear up front and setting those parameters. And then this is about so co-founders are parties to the agreements too. So this is not something this is like sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't happen, but you can agree with co-founders to say that we will agree to a reverse vesting schedule. Do people know what vesting means?
Yeah.
Not everyone's. Does someone who knows want to explain?
So basically, what I know, and maybe I'm wrong. So
don't start an answer with that.
More like the period of time that it takes before you can cash out the shares or equity that you have in the company.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it could be an agreement saying if you've got 10% equity in this company, you cannot cash that out until a certain period of time.
Yeah, I would say I half agree. I think I wouldn't necessarily say cash out. I'd say, because you are right, but I think again it's probably a bit broader than that. I think vesting is basically the principle of earning over time. So, and then when we talk about reverse vesting, we're saying you get everything up front, but if you don't reach the milestones, the company can like claw back the shares. So so in a typical vesting situation, share options will vest over a period of time. So if you have a share option scheme where someone's going to get 5% of your company, which is a lot by the way on the share option scheme, so don't ignore that figure. But if someone is getting 5% of your company via share options every year, if it's over 4 years, every year they'll accrue 1.25%. So in total they'll have 5% after the 4 years is done. So every year they can say, okay, now I have 1.25, now I have 2.5 after the second year. So that's the principle of vesting. Reverse vesting is where you have all the shares issued up front, but because it's kind of simpler that way, but the same kind of principles apply, that you're still earning them over time. So if you don't reach the milestone, which is typically a time, so if you don't reach 3 years, then you don't get to keep 3 years worth of shares, you only get to keep the amount of shares which have vested over that time. Does that make sense? Does that make sense?
If who doesn't reach 3 years, your business or the...
You personally. So your involvement with the company.
So say you decide to drop out, say 2 years in or
Exactly.
12 months down the line.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a protection to say, let's say you've got people who don't know each other that well, or actually that's nothing to do with how well you know people. It just is something that you might agree on. It's basically saying it's a protection for people. If someone leaves, if you're a 50-50 and someone says, all right, I'm out of here, good luck, like the remaining 50% stands a very low chance of succeeding, because 50% of your company is owned by someone who's just disappeared. So kind of, you know, your this probably plants some seeds in people's minds, but it's not something that you have to worry about. It's pretty standard. There's also alternatives to this, but most of the time when you have a shareholders agreement, it will have something along the lines of, if someone is leaving, then something has to happen to their shares. It's just kind of, you know, market standard that that's the position. Your active involvement as a co-founder is a condition of you actually holding these shares. So that's what happens in these agreements.
Does that mean like so if you own like 20% and you're actively involved,
yeah,
and then you decide that you're just gonna let the business run and then keep your shares so it grows while you do nothing?
Yeah, I mean that depends on the type of business. So if you're talking about the business which is like a passive income business, which is just, and you're the founder of it, and you that's something that you would take into consideration. Like you'd factor that in basically. But I think the reason why you do this is that, like, the principle is that if you leave and you're the founder, it's probably not going to carry on and just like make money without you. I think that's the point. And there's two different types of business really. There's the business which is going to make a certain amount of money each month and just keep rolling along, and then there's businesses which probably most investors are interested in, which are going to kind of keep growing and growing and growing, and then eventually reach an exit. So it's like it's kind of something to think about.
So the word leave, that means leaving your shares behind, or leaving as in just physically?
I think physically leaving. So I think your shares are something which just exists. They're just there. I think when I talk about leaving, I'm saying like you were supposed to be the co-founder, but now you're working full time at this company, and you know or you now live in Australia and you don't do anything anymore, that kind of thing. So I think this is also touching on that kind of the investment agreement is also the shareholders agreement between the co-founders. It's a good time to like solidify those things, and the investors will probably insist upon it because they know that co-founders kind of falling out, those relationships going wrong can be the cause of the business collapsing. So it's important for the investor to get that right. Okay. So let's see. All right. This slide is about saying, all right, we've got into kind of a lot of detail about what's in the context of the term sheet. Now I'm just this is about saying this is the very broad process of like actually what happens, how it works. So let's have it. Okay. I'm just going to do this part quickly. Get your SEIS, EIS, subdivision if needed to make your shares more liquid. Term sheet, you send it to them, you agree with them, you then send them a full agreement, because the term sheet isn't, basically doesn't cover everything, but it covers the agreement with the investor. They send you the money, you send a form to Companies House to say that you're issuing new shares, and you give them some share certificates, and then you kind of have all the ongoing relations from there on. That's the process. To be honest, it's not actually that. These two parts are not always that complicated. If you've got fairly straightforward investors and you give them a fairly straightforward document, generally you'll give it to them. They might have a few comments, but generally they'll sign it. We've been through a lot of stuff, but actually what will happen is you'll create the document. Hopefully you'll use my platform to do it, but however you create it, you'll basically you'll understand what's in the document. You'll give it to them. They'll sign it. They'll send you the money. Yeah, there you go. The difficult part is actually agreeing how much you're going to give to them, valuations, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So what is the purpose of a term sheet to be signed, considering that there will be a full agreement with all those details, and there is a term sheet and full agreement may contradict each other in details?
So the reason I recommend using a term sheet, because you're right, in that I personally wouldn't get the term sheet signed. I just say, here you go, these are the terms. The problem is people don't like seeing scary details for the first time in a 30-page document. They want to see it on 2 or 3 pages. You agree everything up front. It's much more straightforward. And then if your term sheet can be quickly negotiated and simple, this part gets it's easy. If you don't do that part can be very cumbersome, because it's you're negotiating in a really long document, and you do this thoroughly in order to get this through, because that part is harder. Yeah.
And a follow-up question, sorry, just real quick. And you're talking about this app that you offer from January. Yeah. So if we create a term sheet there, will the full agreement follow on from that?
I'd like it to, and unfortunately it won't. I did think about that. However, on the basis that it's kind of early stages, so I think what the way I'll do it is you'll create your term sheet, and then the questions that you're answering will relate to what's in your term sheet. So you'll have very clear steers within your term sheet to know what to put into your full agreement. And I think on the basis that it's kind of fairly new, I will still be fairly involved in that process personally. So it's the concept of this app is that you are trying to save money on your legal fees by doing the initial part yourselves, and then you can upgrade if you want to get someone like myself to review things and just make sure it's all okay, make any adjustments for your particular business if you need it. But the overall product is that it's cheaper, but you've also had you've created it in a cheap way, but you've also kind of got someone professional to review it, tell you it's fine. So the end result is you've kind of had it as a bit of a loophole for legal services, which hopefully that's the way it will work. But you're right, that would be a good way of.
Is that the plan?
That is the plan. It's one of those things where currently it's fairly simple technology. You answer a bunch of questions, it fills it in for you. I need to have a way to link those questions, so they apply to 2 things at once. But it should still be basically. There's actually not that much variation, so you'll kind of see that when you do it. Hopefully, you'll see that it will work okay for you, and it'll cover what you need it to.
Quick one.
Yeah.
Issue form to Company House is just more notifying them that you want to issue new shares. It's not you're seeking the approval for you to be able to do that, right?
Say that again, sorry.
So issue form to Company House to issue new shares.
Yeah.
Is it more just letting them know that you
Correct.
want to do this?
Yeah.
Not seeking the approval for doing it.
Exactly. It's just a notification. I think so. Sometimes with Companies House, it's that you're notifying Companies House that you've done something. With the issue of shares, that's kind of the formal way that you're issuing shares. But they're never going to come back to you and say no. If you fill in the form incorrectly, they might come back to you and say, fill in the form correctly. But again, that's not something it's not difficult. reply.
Simon,
Mhm.
if you decide to like raise funds and crowdfunding on one of these
Yeah.
platforms, could you say how that would work as in terms of shares as to these little investments you will receive?
I'm just trying to think. So I spoke to a crowdfunder the other day. When you do crowdfunding, I think they probably have like their own kind of systems where you have agree to their share, that you agree to their documentation that they put forward. I would have thought. Is that your question? Like, how do you how does this work? How does this fit into crowdfunding?
Before you actually kind of start doing it, you kind of do a term sheet and give it to crowdfunding platform, which is like either single investor or multiple investors. It would be the same rules apply for person to the
Okay.
So
Yeah. To be honest, I would.
to have a term sheet.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that you're right. The same thing applies to crowdfunding too as well, because they will have to review and approve it before you can even, get listed on the platform. And all of this information are basically things that you prepare your application today. And I think for crowdfunding too as well, you kind of need some sort of guaranteed investment somewhere. Again, that might vary by with different platforms. But one of my friends just launched, just got listed on CrowdCube, and I think there was need for him to kind of get like £20,000 investment upfront before coming into that platform. And the reason for that is also to kind of encourage people to actually put money into it, because when you're likely to invest if you see that people already invested in that.
Yeah, crowdfunding is a good thing. I don't know enough about it to answer that. Sorry. Yeah, I guess, on that question before, so to date, my business has been to do this kind of thing in a more manual way. Ultimately, not for that much. The cost is fairly similar. So usually you'd come to me, I'd say to you, okay, I'll price match what like the other online platforms are doing, or that kind of thing. We'll just do it. I'll prepare them. So this is ideally a way to make that a bit cheaper, but a bit more automated, and but you would still ultimately have the input of someone like myself to kind of guide you through that process, because the technology on the platform that I'll have, it won't do absolutely everything. So it's kind of like a bit of a hybrid system. If you go to ignore the front couple of pages, that's just kind of some background reading. And basically there's I've taken a guide that I've got on seed funds, I've taken a portion of it, put it on the front 2 pages of this document, and kind of pressed pause at the term sheets part. So you can kind of read through that guide as a bit of information in conjunction with this presentation that we've had, and kind of just to educate yourselves on the process. So we're going to do this exercise. We don't have to complete it right now, but just depending on time. I think, what time was this workshop expected to go into? Are we?
Oh, yeah, we've got at least another half an hour.
Fine. If people need to go, then it's not rude. You can leave. So what we're going to do for the people who are able to stay, we're gonna like just run through this and try and create some parts of your term sheet. So I've given an example, but what's that, sorry?
If I leave, can I keep it?
No, you have to give it back. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. You can keep it. So I'm going to send the soft copies of those documents out. And obviously, thank you. If you've got questions, then just let me know. I'll wait for a second so we can. Actually, do you want to just have a kind of quick read through what's in that table, and then we'll run through it. See you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming. Do you guys want to shuffle forward? Good? There you got a seat. Yes, I mean, broadly, to some extent, this table is a bit like a blank term sheet. It's not quite a blank term sheet, but it's a bit like what it will look like. So, basic company information. I've set this out in the same way as what's in the PowerPoint. Maybe I'll go back to that slide. So, I'm just thinking of the best way for us to go through this.
So, a director's loan, does that mean money out of your own pocket that you invested in the company and you're looking at it as a loan, or you mean like you went somewhere and got a loan?
Director's loan, when I had that in mind, where have I written it?
It's right above the thing.
In the bullet points.
I got you. I've got that in mind that you, as part of starting your company, have given the company like an amount of money, which for accounting purposes or for your own purposes, you're treating as a loan from yourself to the company.
You're right.
So, is there anything which, from those first 4 bullet points, is there anything which stands out to anyone?
That was a question I've had a long time.
Yeah.
No one's been able to answer.
If I was going through this, I'm just gonna point out the bits that I think kind of are different and stand out. So I'm gonna say single angel investor. I'm gonna pick out variables. Single angel investor, as in like it can be different if there's more than one. Everything that we've done today is somewhat geared towards one angel investor. If there's more than one, you kind of want to let them know. I think the best way to approach these, if you've got more than one investor, or the best way probably to approach any investor, is probably to say, rather than saying, I've got this cool new startup, please invest in it, I'd probably be more going to say, I'm raising £50,000 or I'm raising £100,000 or £1 million. That's part of my investment round. Would you like to participate in it? How much are you in for? I think that's a more focused, direct way of going for it. It also gives them the impression that you're focused and you're looking for a specific amount of money to use it on specific things, rather than just saying, we're going to need money and what we might use it for different things. They want to see that you're direct and that you mean business. I haven't done that before. That's how I feel like is the best way to do it. They're experienced in business. That's relevant. Director's loan. They're keen to get involved operationally.
Maintaining control.
Yeah.
So where do you address that director's loan in the table?
Good point. I would address that in the warranties section. So there's a small aspect missing here, which is what I'd call disclosures. So the broad setup is that you have the warranties, which are promises that you make to your investor, or in any contract, a warranty is just a promise that you make. So it's like, I warrant that I have the right to enter into this contract is translation for I promise that I have the right to enter into this contract. What you have is the warranties, but you also have what are called disclosures. Disclosures are things which you tell the investor, which are kind of sit above the warranties. So it's like these warranties apply, except that this, and this. So in a director's loan example, you'd say, I warrant that the company has no outstanding debt, except that I'm disclosing to you that there's a director's loan of £20,000 and I'm going to use your money to repay me. That might not go down so well, but like you could do it you could say, I'm going to use £5,000 of it to kind of, as part of my salary for the next couple of months, something like that. So that's what the disclosures are. So you would put your disclosures next to the warranties, and they kind of intertwine with each other like that. And then if there's a breach of the warranties, you would usually say that the investor has the right to kind of reclaim their money. And a warranty, which means that you shouldn't make a warranty if it's not true. Warranties are quite like big. They're often negotiated a lot, because if you can claim against a warranty, there's usually a big punishment. There's a big punishment for breaching a warranty, which is usually that you have to pay the money back. So you have to be quite careful on those things. A big warranty would be around intellectual property, which is where, or something that's relevant here, you'd say, I warrant that we hold all the intellectual property in the business, and a disclosure might be, we've got an outstanding trademark application, so we don't actually own it, but we're applying and we're doing our best for it. Is there a question there?
Is that common? Like if you build a company for a year and you spend time and money into it, and then you just say, okay, like it's cost me like $20,000 in actual cash,
Yeah.
and then you don't count like the actual time or whatever. So when you're doing the investment, can you just say like, I just want some of that money or all of that money back?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's up to you and your invest. I think it depends on the level of investment as well. It's like an £150,000 investment, and you're taking X amount of it back now. They might have something to say about it, but if they're investing at £1 million and you're going to take your £20,000 back, then they'll probably say good for you.
Right. And then because they'd rather you spend it on new stuff than.
I guess so. They're investing to further the business, but at the same time, I think you got to manage it. You just got to manage it, basically. If you want that, when I say manage it, I mean like emotionally manage it with the investor. Like if that turns them the wrong way, it doesn't get you off to a great start. But at the same time, if it's money that you feel like you should be taking back for all the effort you put in, like, I think it's something to consider.
Because I've brought that up before, and then it's always been mentioned like, oh, investors, they don't want to see their money going in that direction, but then you're supposed to like disguise it in other expenses. But then like I don't understand why is that a problem if you're working on the company?
Yeah, well, I think if you're talking about like annoying the investors, basically.
Yeah, like because I've mentioned this before, and it's always been like, well, the investors, they don't want to know that this is being used for you or for your costs.
Yeah.
Considering that you built it up to that point, so
Yeah.
they've always suggested to find other
Yeah,
places.
like
to,
your salary or whatever.
Yeah, like to put the money in other places where you'll have like other expenses.
Yeah, I think the reason anyone would say that is because investors are human beings, and if they're giving money, they're probably not. They're thinking about, oh, this is going to go towards marketing, product development, all that stuff. They're probably mentally, it probably isn't going to make sense to them if that's going directly to you. Yeah, you can put it as part of your salary. You can do those things, but again, like I say, there's no real rules about this stuff. It's not a legal rule. It's about the relationship that you have with your investor and the decisions that you come to with them. So it's a bit like if you go to a new job and the first thing you say in a job interview is like, how many holiday days do I get? Like it's just not going to come across that well because they want to know that you're ready to work hard. It's like
That's how you present it.
Yeah, exactly. You got to present it in the right way. So
one thing I guess you could do is just kind of account for that in your valuation, just inflate your valuation a bit more to account for that, right? Because that's what you're doing, you're selling shares, valuation's up to you.
Right.
yeah. And then I guess so. Yeah, True. So then you hold more shares, but it's not.
Yeah.
Not necessarily more liquid, but true.
Yeah.
So do we? I'm thinking. Do we want to go through this stuff now? Do we want to go through this table? Should we try and do it? Okay. So I'm gonna ignore part 1, basic company information. I presume you all know that about your companies. You can access that from Companies House at any time. Investor details, their name, the amount. These are things that depend on the circumstances of the deal. So feel free to put your ideal investor in there, or make up an amount that suits you. Investment amount, number of shares offered. So total equity. So I'm going to skip parts 1 and 2 because I think you basically have the information you need to fill that in. So it's your information, the investor's information. You come up with the valuation, you come up with the amounts of shares that you want to give to them, and you do the calculation, which is on the PowerPoint and also which is on page 1 of this handout. So you can do that yourselves.
So can I ask a question about valuation?
Yeah.
So how do you include what you value, what value the company is? I mean, I've heard a lot of stories about founders, kind of inflating the valuation.
It's nonsense, really. Lots of companies will say, yeah, we've got a valuation of £2 million, but they've literally done nothing. It's one of those things which is just kind of, it's the nature of the market at the moment. People, I can't say to you, I feel like people just make these things up a bit. They look at, so if you were looking at a real company valuation, you'd assess all the assets in the company, the contracts that it has, the physical assets that it has, the profit that it's making, and you'd multiply the profit by, or you'd multiply the turnover by a certain number to calculate an official value, and that would be the job of a financial advisor or accountant to come up with that value. That's not going to happen with a startup that's not generating any revenue. So the only thing you can do is kind of create some projections and then create a valuation based on a multiplier of those projections. That we're going to earn this. It's like we're going to earn this money in year 1, and year 2, and year 3, and so we'll multiply by this. I think a lot of it is kind of. I don't think you have to know what you're talking about a bit. You don't have to just make something up. But lots of companies come up with things which I would consider to be unreasonable. I think to some extent you want to be it's a bit like if you're buying a house, you want to see what the market price is at the moment in different areas, and to some extent you have to kind of look at what's going on. I think also your ability to offer shares for with SEIS or EIS tax relief means that you can actually create a higher valuation because the risk is lower for the investor, so they're kind of happier to invest at a higher valuation. So can I tell you the exact number? No, but I would encourage you to be ambitious with it, not too ambitious, but I wouldn't, don't undersell what you're trying to do. If someone wants to invest, they don't expect to suddenly own the whole company. I've seen a lot of kind of, if someone's going to put in £100,000, the typical value might be around 20%. A lot of the time you might see an SEIS round of 150,000 selling for around 20%, which may sound like a lot. You could also do it for less, but that would be instinctively, that's kind of what comes to mind. So SEIS and EIS and SEIS availability, and here we're saying it's going to have that. You're either going to say, sorry, we don't qualify, or you're going to say, yes, this investment is going to qualify for EIS or SEIS. Share rights. We're going to say that the investor will have shares. This is voting, dividends, that kind of thing. So we're going to say here that the investor has full voting rights equal to the founders. So the investors' shares have the same voting value as the founders' shares. Does that make sense?
A little bit.
So each share, so it's 100 shares,
Yeah.
each share carries a vote.
Okay.
So if the investors hold 10 shares and you as the founder hold 90 shares, you have 90 votes, they have 10 votes.
Okay.
That's in terms of like calculating who's won, basically. So
Okay.
so in practice, it's like, you know, your opinion, you win, unless it falls within the consent matters where you have to get their consent. That's a minority right. So usually the founders are going to hold more shares than the investors, so they can pass almost anything they want, and that's why the investors have these consent matters to say, okay, for these matters, no, it's not going to work that way. I get to have my say here. That's how that works. Information rights, you're going to choose account, business plan, anything else that you want to give to them. That ad hoc right to just call you up and say, what's going on? Tell me how things are going. Board seat for investor, generally not, but some will require it. So then we're looking at operational plans. I'd probably be thinking between you as the founder or the founders, who's going to do what to some extent. What's your title going to be, like on your LinkedIn page is, you know, is somewhat relevant. Like these things matter. Directors, usually going to be just the founders. Board meetings once a month or once a quarter. Share option scheme. So I think for any share option scheme, the lowest you're going to see is around, we're talking about now an allocation of your whole company. So you set aside what was generally called a pool, so a pool of shares which you're setting aside for the purposes of share options. So usually it's anywhere between five on the low end, 20 on the high end. Typically I tend to see 10 or 15. Share option schemes are not as complicated as people make out a lot of the time. You can be done like fairly straightforwardly.
Sorry, so
yeah.
let's say generally if you get 10% for example, we would have 4 at 10% and one at maybe 8 or 9%, so you keep control of the company. Would that be right?
Say that again, sorry.
So let's say, when you say share option scheme,
yeah.
I'm thinking of I control maybe 51% of the company.
Yeah.
And I've given out four investors 10%.
Okay.
And maybe one investor I've given 8%.
Yeah.
So I've got about 53%. Would that be right?
I don't know the maths.
Oh, just in general. So let's just keep it simple. 4 people,
yeah.
10%. I've got 60. They've got 40.
Yeah.
Would that be okay?
Yeah. So how it would work is that you're basically, you think of all the shares in existence and to become in existence. So share options are like they're future shares, and you factor those in when you're talking about the total pool of shares. So in terms of percentages that you think of, you have 60, they each have 10, but then there's going to be an extra, let's say 10 or 11, which form part of the share option scheme. So your 60 is not a total out of 100, it's a total out of 111, which is the total shares in existence plus 11 or so for share options. So everyone is diluted by the share option scheme. And the reason we do this now is because usually you would have to get permission to issue new shares because of the rights of first refusal that we mentioned.
So does that mean the dilution happens on execution of that option? But you've agreed it up front.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So usually you've all heard of what's called a cap table, which is it's called a cap table which is short for share cap table, share capital table. Sets out all the shares which are in issue and which might be issued. So it will set out the shares which exist now. It will set out the options. It will have all those things there. Again, that doesn't need to be. Okay, it's not something that you can just do with your eyes closed, but it doesn't have to be something that's like so complicated. Partially, I say these things because I think some things in the legal market are oversold and made to seem too complicated. I don't think this is that complicated, especially in the early stages of your shareholding. It's like everything that we've just said, for example, that's your share cap table. Tells you, who holds shares and what other shares might exist. Not quite that complex. So the next bit is all about the investor protections. So we talked about these before. So usually, and the stuff, for example, on my it's on Legal Sidekick, for example, I generate a list of questions and I say, answer these questions and create your term sheet. For these things, I usually just say, you know, do you want to include standard investor protections, preemption rights, tag-along rights, that kind of thing, because those things are going to be in every single one. The reason we're explaining them is because, you know, it's kind of worthwhile knowing about it. Consent rights. So I think, listen, I think we've got to where we're going to get to with this. I don't like. You're not going to create your. We're not going to create a full term sheet now, which you can give to an investor. But listen, it's not the term sheet. Well, if anyone needs a term sheet kind of urgently, like let me know, because basically. So I'll give you the context. So this business that I'm doing, think of me as one of you guys. So my business is in the legal sector. Kind of I'm delivering legal workshops as part of kind of the overall operation. So I'm kind of one of you guys in the context of being a startup, founder, whatever. This is a design that a new designer has done. The previous one didn't look great. Does that one look good?
Yeah.
It's better. It's better. The last one was very black, and people said it looked very dated. So this is just a screenshot of what I've generated myself using this platform, which is fairly straightforward. So I said, tell me your company name. Said my company name, which is Startup Number 1 Limited. I said that gave my company details, the address, the number, the investor, Mr. Moneybags. Amount to be invested, I said 150. So this stuff is like, you'll be able to create the term sheet.
Is this
pretty simple?
Like Termly?
What's that, sorry?
Are you familiar with Termly?
Termly, probably, yeah. I don't know that one, but like...
It's like for, I don't know, I put an app in the App Store, and in order to do that, you have to have terms and conditions. So I went to this website and I just filled out a bunch of stuff and
Yeah,
then spit out
exactly. So this principle is not like I've definitely not invented this principle. It's like this is like a fairly common thing nowadays that you can it's a way of creating legal documents. The process, I guess the concept around this is that and the reason I would say to ask you guys to use this is because you know me now, you can ask me questions, and there's going to be like lots of legal guides and information on it.
There's like people behind it.
What's that, sorry?
So then you have the option to have a real person.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of manage it yourself, and if you're not sure, it's a bit like riding a bike with stabilizers. But that's the general principle. I've cut off the screenshot, so I can't show you the rest. But basically, that's the principle. So if you look at your term sheet, or the table, you can see that those are the rows, and in the one that you create, the rows will populate. And my hope here is that when you create that, whether it's with this or whatever you use, you understand it, you know what's there. Does anyone have any questions?
Is it going to be ready? You said 2 weeks, right?
So I can create one of these now. So the term sheet I can do, but the guys that are developing it, they're putting all these designs on it. It's not quite ready. It should be like, I said 2 weeks to you on the email.
Yeah.
That would be more like 2 weeks because it's kind of it would be a bit more private. I'd have to give you like a login to the the kind of private back end, which would be fine. I'm not sure. I wonder if I can kind of do that for everyone. Probably not in the next 2 weeks. Is anyone? What's that, sir?
When is it going to go live?
It should be the start of January. So it will be live for the purposes of it will be available for you guys to create an account, create your term sheet, for example. But my hope is that there will be like hundreds of documents on this thing. There won't be hundreds of documents come the beginning of January, but you will be able to create something. You'll be able to create a term sheet.
How much is it?
TBC. So I need to think about like what the prices would be. How much do you think a term sheet should cost?
I mean, you said it's simple.
Yeah,
to do. So
yeah. I agree. Honestly, I think a term sheet is not going to be something that's like particularly pricey, because the idea is that create a term sheet with us, and then do the rest with us too, and all your other term sheet is like a nice intro. So, what do you think it would cost?
I think it should be tailored based on the startup.
Yeah.
If you want to do something fairly simple,
Yeah.
should have like a cap, and if you're looking to do something more complex, like I don't know,
This is going to be
You're
a
trying
simple
to
one.
build
Simple
a-
term sheet. What do you think?
a rocket.
How much does the lawyer charge?
I think it should be.
Just give him the money, someone. God.
I think it should be zero for a time sheet, and then if you want to do other stuff with us, this is the package.
Yeah.
Did he say zero?
Well, yeah, everyone's got to eat, but
No, this is a package. They want to do other things with us. This is a package, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not just. I just didn't. So a term sheet.
Yeah, yeah.
I still need a full agreement, for example,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
exactly.
So you're gonna pay me with
Yeah,
a
maybe
full
you're right.
agreement,
Maybe you're
something
right.
like that.
Yeah. Well, if all you guys want to create the term sheet for free on there, then pay the fuller price for the whole lot.
No, but
Yeah, that's a good deal.
But Simon, if you're subscribing to your
Yeah.
platform, you will be paying a monthly fee. So obviously, okay, if you have a term sheet on there, the term
Yeah.
sheet probably is free. Otherwise, if you want it to be checked to verify that it's
Exactly,
correct,
stuff like that.
Yeah.
then you add a fee, because don't forget the person's already paying a subscription.
Yeah. So you basically you would create. I appreciate this. This is some good feedback. So you would go in, you create an account. Your account is free. If you want to then download a bunch of like resources, which would be like letters, emails, your all cap tables, that kind of thing. That stuff is the stuff that you subscribe for, so you can download anything as and when you want. So create something like a term sheet, or to do an investment round, which includes a term sheet, you would just pay a one-off fee for those particular documents, which would be discounted if you were a paying subscriber, which could be discounted a lot if you were, those things are TBC. But for me, for a term sheet like that, I'm personally, I would say I'm torn between like maybe free, but also maybe it's not going to be expensive. Not going to be expensive.
Like, I don't know. I use a website that lets you create pitch decks
Yeah.
using templates.
Yeah.
And I think it's like $96 for a year.
Yeah.
To be able to make one.
Yeah.
Where essentially, if you only needed one,
Yeah.
you'd spend I don't think I would use that website again.
Yeah.
But I would spend £96 to use just to get that one
Yeah.
thing out of it.
Yeah. I'll think about it, but I think at the end of the day, the term sheet should be fairly simple.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be expensive, and also I think you guys are at the presentation. It's a new business, so it's going to be like cheaper also for you guys, because I'm keen to get your feedback to some extent on how it's all going to work. So your amount of money that you put into this is maybe just it's more of a token to say it's working, money's going in and out of it, but it's less about generating profit for the business. It's more about like people.
But I think a subscription model actually works.
Yeah.
I think that makes perfect sense. And the fact that you just subscribe to this, then you get a certain discount rate as well.
Yeah.
Because what you also want is you want people always coming back to it, and they should have a reason to come back.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Not just do one off, like a pitch deck, for example. I mean, I'm not going to pay $96 if I'm just going to need more pitch deck.
Yeah.
For example, so it's kind of thinking about how that is going to be structured and what that is going to look like for the consumers, basically.
Great. Sorry, go on.
How much are term sheets?
How much are they? That's what I was saying. I'm like not sure exactly how much that's going to be. The term sheet's
not yours.
How much a lawyer's going to be? I mean, again, when I was working for a law firm, on my first day before I'd even started, like my hourly rate was over £200. So to create a term sheet with a lawyer is a few £100s. Like with an expensive lawyer, like over £1,000, but with a kind of more of a startup approach, less than that. If it was to do with, so my consulting business is called Accelerate Law. If you came to me and said, I want to do your funding round, I'd like agree. I'd say to you, look at what else is on the market, see where we can get it from. We'll kind of agree a fee on that. Like usually to do a total funding round, which has been like SCIS type stuff, 150, 200k, generally will cost you around like £1,500. and that includes the term sheet and all the bits and bobs around it. So yeah, sorry, to give you a benchmark, if I was just doing it myself, if you came to me and said, I'm raising money, can you help me with the documents, do the voting, I'd charge in the region of £1,500, depending on what you're getting. If you're raising £5,000 from your friend, then we just do something very quick for like, a lot less than that. But that includes then the term sheet and all the documents. And the idea of this is that it will be cheaper than that, but you still get a lot of the benefits of that.
Can you get the documents anywhere else? I mean, it's not free.
Probably. I'm sure you can access these things online. I think the question is, like, yeah, I'm sure there's places you can get it. If you, I mean, sorry, I don't want to carry on for too long. If you were saying to me, there's this amazing term sheet for free on here, I'd say show it to me, and I'll have to think about that because that's like the, yeah, it's not like it's not a race to the bottom, but like
That's the competition.
yeah, I think if there's like a exactly if there's a human behind it and you want support with your funding round, then there's like a somewhat of a price to pay for that. But broadly, if I was to settle on something, it would be like term sheet doesn't cost a lot, but it's kind of an entry into like doing the full agreement, which you're raising money, you expect to pay for it. But this is not just a marketing mission. I hope you guys have learned about what you needed to learn. If you have questions on it, definitely please ask me. And you have my, I'll send the documents. You have my email, which is here. And thanks very much.
Thanks, Simon. Speaking about free stuff, we do have some pizza downstairs if anyone's hungry, and some beer and cider. I know you're gluten intolerant, I'm sorry. We also have a workshop next Tuesday on marketing, so feel free to come on to that as well. Cool.
It's at the same time next Tuesday as well.
Yeah.
Past 6. Yeah. Great.
A bit earlier.
Yeah. It's literally what we kind of began to look at. So yeah, it's really good timing actually.
Yeah. So
I'm glad you did.
Good.
Hungry?
Sometimes you have to hear it a few times for it to, be understandable.
Stop there.
That doesn't get registered anywhere, that's just like your...
Do you want to pop downstairs?
Yeah.